AM radio, an op-ed column, and Fox News is not enough. I want a center-right nation to fight for its soul, and its soul is represented in the arts. Its soul is represented in a world in which media is everything. AM radio is the lowest form of communication. It's tinny, it's not robust, it's not Avatar. I want Avatar. I want the right to enter the world of media to the extent and invest in media the way that the left does.
The fake media is trying to silence us, but we will not let them, because the people know the truth. The fake media tried to stop us from going to the White House, but I'm president and they're not.
You're listening to the Curt Schilling Podcast, a Breitbart.com podcast. The podcast starts now. Here's Curt with today's headlines.
Hey guys, welcome to podcast. This would be number 8 of the Curt Schilling Podcast. Great show set up today. Colonel Alan West joins us, and then hopefully a new representative from California in Omar Navarro, a man running to oust one of the most ridiculously idiotic people ever elected in American politics, in Maxine Waters. And we're going to get right to it too. There's a lot to talk about, some really good sound. Let me just give you a quick synopsis of who and what Maxine Waters is. This is just a little compilation of her stupidity, all in one clip.
I have not called for the impeachment yet. He's doing it himself. Let me just say that the statement I made was a statement in response to questions and pleas that I'm getting from many citizens across this country. What are we going to do? How can a president who is acting in the manner that he's acting, whether he's talking about the travel ban, the way that he's targeting Muslims, or whether he's talking about his relationship to Putin and the Kremlin, and knowing that they have hacked our DCCC and DNC, and knowing that he is responsible for supplying the bombs that killed innocent children and families in Aleppo, and the fact that he is wrapping his arms around Putin while Putin is continuing to advance into Korea, I think that he is leading himself into that kind of position where folks will begin to ask, what are we going to do? And the answer is going to be, eventually, we've got to do something about him. We cannot continue to have a president who's acting in this manner. It is dangerous to the United States of America.
You know what that was? That was someone who's really stupid trying to sound intelligent. That's what that was. In addition to the irrational stuff, Putin advancing in Korea, really, providing the bombs that killed innocents in Aleppo, all of the things that this president is dealing with, he's dealing with because the previous administration was such a cluster, number one. But number two, this is a woman who I think is like a 13 or 14 term, unopposed, has to be representing one of the most insanely, ridiculously socialism-driven places on the country. She called for the public targeting of Trump administration officials. She was so far off the reservation, in a manner of speaking, that Chuck Schumer chastised her on the floor of the Senate. Listen to this.
Here in the Senate, we disagree with one another frequently and often fervently. I certainly do. Many of us disagree with the policies of the current administration. In a country as large and diverse as ours, politics has always been a noisy, raucous affair, probably even more so today. And that's okay. But we all have to remember to treat our fellow Americans, all of our fellow Americans, with the kind of civility and respect we expect will be afforded to us. I strongly disagree with those who advocate harassing folks if they don't agree with you. If you disagree with someone or something, stand up, make your voice heard, explain why you think they're wrong and why you're right, make the argument, protest peacefully. If you disagree with a politician, organize your fellow citizens to action and vote them out of office. But no one should call for the harassment of political opponents. That's not right. That's not American.
First time the man has ever opened his mouth and said something I'm even in the same hemisphere as agreeing. We have Maxine's opponent in the next election at the end of the show today, Omar Navarro, and I want you to, this is a man who deserves your vote and deserves our support. And finally, when you think about who and what Maxine Waters is, this is something that isn't well known about her. But I want you to listen to Larry Elder on Fox and talking about her and what kind of human being she really is.
Of the 535 lawmakers on D.C., Tucker, she's the only one, to my knowledge, who's written a letter to Fidel Castro urging him not to send back a woman who murdered a New Jersey state trooper, escaped, fled to Cuba. Congress passed a resolution urging Castro to return her. She wrote a letter to Castro. The woman who escaped is a former Black Panther. She likened her to a freedom fighter, accused her of being a victim of the criminal justice system, and urged Castro not to return her to America. The woman, Joanne Chesimard, remains at the top of New Jersey's most wanted list, and Maxine Waters urged Castro not to send her back. That's point one. Second one is she falsely accused the CIA of basically fomenting the crack cocaine epidemic in the 80s and the 90s in the inner city, a argument that's been debunked by the Washington Post, the New York Times, and the LA Times. And of course, she had a meeting with the then Secretary of Treasury, urging him during the financial meltdown to bail out minority-owned banks without informing him that she and her husband had a financial interest in one of said minority banks, for which she was investigated by the House for ethics violation, played the race card. The violation, therefore, went supernova. It is one of the reasons, Tucker, why one of the left-wing groups, Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics, constantly labels her as one of the most corrupt politicians in Washington, D.C.
Anytime you hear a black person, male or female, accuse another black person of playing the race card, I always feel like that's a pretty powerful indictment. And he's right. This is as crooked as they come is who she is. We're going to have Omar Navarro on after my first guest, and my first guest is going to be Colonel Allen West. The topic is going to be the travel ban. As you know, the United States Supreme Court upheld the ban, which we knew was going to happen if the Supreme Court ever got in front of it. Now you have the left unhinged, screaming about the rigged Supreme Court and all the things that entails. I want you to listen to a couple things. First of all, I want you to listen to Keith Ellison. Keith is one of the he is as radical and as left-leaning as they come. This is Jake Tapper, of all people, on CNN calling out the hypocrisy in Keith Ellison.
When Obama adds restrictions on visitors, travelers from Iran, Iraq, Sudan, Syria, Libya, Somalia, and Yemen, just empirically, do you have a problem with that? Forget Trump for a second. Forget what he said for a second.
You know, Jake, well, I don't think we can forget Trump for a second because this is about his travel ban. But I will tell you this, that wherein there are legitimate national security problems that are demonstrable and measurable, that I think the president should use those factors to safeguard the American people. That is clear. But I will just say, Jake, that that's not what this is all about. And I think that we cannot simply ignore intent, purpose, and we can't ignore the way that this president has approached this entire issue. I think that it makes a lot of difference who would be exercising the discretion here. Somebody who believes in our constitutional norms of equal justice for all and equality before the law, or somebody who has really just sort of said that they're not about that. So I think these things are important, and I know folks would like to wish away Trump here, but we can't. He's the president. This was his measure in the beginning, and he's going to continue to be the president for at least the foreseeable future.
You've been decrying President Trump's bigotry. Obviously, you used to follow somebody who continually expressed sexist, anti-LGBTQ, and anti-Semitic bigotry, Louis Farrakhan. You have condemned Farrakhan's bigotry. But I would disagree with that. I would disagree with that, sir. But I'm sorry. What are you disagreeing with? That comes up in this context. Well, you're decrying bigotry, and Louis Farrakhan is a pretty clear bigot. Right, and I agree that that's true, and I think that I've made myself very clear. But look, that's going back to the false equivalency. You know, I don't have any support for what the individual you just mentioned stands for, nor do I agree with Trump's bigotry either.
But that again, you know, anytime somebody tries to say that something is unfair and bigoted, if you're going to say, well, one time you sort of said something or somebody said you said something, and then so nobody
you were a follower of
bigotry.
You were a follower of Farrakhan,
Jake,
sir.
No, I wasn't. Jake, I'm sorry. That's not true, Jake. But I just want to say to you, if anyone who raises concerns about bigotry then is put in a position to have to defend themselves, then we never get to talk about bigotry. And I hope that's not what your purpose is, Jake, because you've stood for an equal society. But if you're going to try to put me on the spot and have to explain myself, I didn't pass a Muslim ban. I didn't, right,
no,
Jake?
you didn't.
This is not my piece of my.
You didn't let me answer.
You
didn't let me ask my question. My question was: the Washington Post fact checker in March gave you 4 Pinocchios for your claim that you have no relationship with him. And I want you to take a listen to Farrakhan talking in an interview
That's wrong.
About how you only.
That's not true.
And Farrakhan, well, the Washington Post fact checker did give you 4 Pinocchios
Jake,
about that.
So he just basically sat there and lied his ass off. Because you can go to YouTube, go to any of the places on the internet, and you will find comments by both Ellison, Farrakhan, many in between, of his support of Louis Farrakhan. He just basically said, no, I'm not, flat out lying, which isn't the point, but it is part of the point. This is a guy who supports probably one of the most outspoken bigots on the planet in Louis Farrakhan. He hates America. Well, I mean, he's radical. Let's put it that way, and you know he is as well. And they're going up against men like this. My first guest will be joining me here in a few minutes. I want you to listen to this man. This is a man who I've known a while and who knows why the travel ban is making America safe immediately upon implementation. Listen to Colonel Allen West.
The first thing you got to do is you got to study and understand who you're up against. And you must realize that this is not a religion that you're fighting against. You're fighting against a theopolitical belief system and construct. You're fighting against something that's been doing this thing since 622 AD, 7th century, 1,388 years. You want to dig up Charles Martel and ask him why he was fighting the Muslim army at the Battle of Tours in 732. You want to ask the Venetian fleet at Lepanto why they were fighting a Muslim fleet in 1571. You want to ask the Christian, the Germanic and Austrian knights why they were fighting at the gates of Vienna in 1683. You want to ask people what happened at Constantinople and why today is called Istanbul, because they lost that fight in 1453. You need to get into the Quran. You need to understand their precepts. You need to read the Surah. You need to read the Hadiths. And then you can really understand this is not a perversion. They are doing exactly what this book says. But, all right. And I'm going to close, I want to close by saying this. And I think we have said this all through this morning so far. Until you get principled leadership in the United States of America that is willing to say that, we will continue to chase our tail, because we will never clearly define who this enemy is and then understand their goals and objectives, which is on any jihadist website, and then come up with the right and proper goals and objectives to not only secure our republic, but to secure Western civilization.
That is, hopefully, after President Trump's done serving, the next president of the United States, Colonel Allen West, who's been on the battlefield and has had the left's full attention, recognizing what an incredibly dangerous man he is for the left. The travel ban was upheld by the Supreme Court in a 5-4 decision, basically acknowledging what we all know. And what that means is U.S. consulates and embassies around the world will no longer approve visas for people traveling on passports from Iran, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, Syria, or Yemen to come to the U.S. unless they can establish, and this is a big one, quote-unquote, bona fide relationships with someone or something. Basically, that means if you have a business venture or a university or school, you're speaking, a job offer, conference invitation, or certain family members, you're not allowed to come here for, 90 days, I think. By family and bona fide, they're talking about direct family, spouse, child, adult, son or daughter, son-in-law, daughter-in-law, siblings, but no aunts and uncles and nieces and nephews, which seems reasonable. And again, that's not forever. It's just a chance for us to sit back and figure out a process. These countries, it's not, there are 40 other Muslim-heavy countries in this world that aren't on this ban, so it's not a ban on Muslims. It's not even a ban on the biggest Muslim countries. It's a ban on the countries that have governments that are anti-U.S., or governments that don't have the organization or the wherewithal to identify its citizens enough that we can identify them. So the ban is more a matter of take a breath, sit back and figure out exactly who and what we're dealing with. And I can't think of a safer, more conscious way of getting your ducks in a row than doing that. And this is the same group fighting this that's fighting the southern. They want the southern border to be wide open, as Clinton said, a hemispherical border. You heard liberals talk about the fact that this doesn't make us safer, and like everything else, that's the exact opposite of the truth. We're safer the second this happens. The second it happens. And then last night we had Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She's 28 years old. She defeated heavily favored Democratic incumbent Joe Crowley in the Democratic primary of the New York 14th on a promise to abolish immigration and customs. People are kind of freaking out, but my response was, that's a great thing, because it shows you where the party of liberalism is these days on social issues. They are so far left. The things they want have absolutely no affinity, no affiliation with who and what this country is, that they're electing people like this, radicals like this. And this woman clearly doesn't have, at 28 years old, doesn't have the first clue about immigration and border security, but she knows what she wants. And that's a good thing. Another piece of news that I think is incredibly important. Tomorrow, I will have James Dellingpole on, who is my resident climate change hoax guy, who has pointed me to some of the best literature in the world to find out about this stuff. But a federal district judge in San Francisco dismissed a lawsuit brought by the cities of San Francisco and Oakland against big oil companies for fighting climate change. And this was the judge who actually had two sides of the argument come in and basically put together a class for him so he could understand the dynamics and the scientific information and data behind climate change. He basically said, first of all, the scope of the plaintiff's theory is breathtaking. It would reach the sale of fossil fuels anywhere in the world, including all past and otherwise lawful sales, where the seller knew that the combustion of fossil fuels contributed to the phenomenon of global warming. While these actions are brought against the first, second, fourth, sixth, and ninth largest producers of fossil fuels, anybody who supplied fossil fuels with knowledge of the problem would be liable. Add to the fact that was a giant win, but the fact that NOAA, NOAA, has decided to walk away from its life spent fighting for climate change. They are walking away from the argument. That came out yesterday. It was on Breitbart.com. We all know that man impacts the climate. Just for the simple fact we're here. That's just impossible for us not to. But for the left to have taken it to be the greatest threat to mankind in civilization's history is both insane, irresponsible, and pretty much criminal, because of the trillions of dollars that people don't understand the climate change movement brought about and raised for people on the left. And I'm going to point it to you again. The book is called Green Tyranny, and the author is Rupert Darwall. If you want to understand how the green movement came to be, why it came to be, and what it means, and why it means what it means, I urge you to read this book. It's the best book I've ever read, and it's actually a book that you're going to put down and reread immediately if you care about this subject, because it explains very intimately how it came to be. So we're going to take a short break. On the flip side of this, Colonel Alan West is going to join us.
Breitbart News Daily with Alex Marlow. Jeannie in Pennsylvania.
I think he's gotten away from what we really hired him to do, which is draining the swamp. If you look at the real picture of draining a swamp, you go in and you take all the water out of it. What does it leave? It leaves the gunk. He cannot get rid of the gunk. We have to get rid of the gunk. Everything he's doing, he's lowering the water so we can see who needs to go. The only way they can go is if we vote them out.
Breitbart News Daily, weekdays at 6 a.m. Eastern on Sirius XM Patriot 125.
You're listening to the Curt Schilling Podcast. Once again, here's Curt Schilling.
Welcome back, guys. Joining me now, he is exactly what you'd look for in an American, a patriot, a good man. My father used to say, good people. Was my father's best description of someone. This man is good people. He is Colonel Alan West. Good morning, sir. How are you?
Good morning, Kurt. Good to be with you.
It's always a pleasure. Listen, I want to get right to it. Yesterday, the Supreme Court did what it should have done, which was uphold the letter of the law and the Constitution that provides the president powers. And I would argue, in many ways, the presidency is very, very simple. The job is to protect the American people and to provide a place for the American dream to grow inside the borders of this country. The ruling yesterday did exactly that. And the left is unhinged. And my biggest problem is, like everything else, Colonel, the left forces the argument into a place that it doesn't belong, number one. And I say that for this reason. First of all, the travel ban's not permanent. It's 90 days. And it's a list of countries that they are Muslim majority, but there's 40 other countries that are Muslim majority that aren't on this list, number one. I argue that this is a list of countries made up of people and governments that hate our country, number one, or there's no organization to tell who and what their citizens are. They can't identify their people, so how the hell are we going to do that? But this is, to me, in military terms, this is kind of a lull in the battle. Take 90 days, assess the situation, reassess how you're doing things, and then get back after it. It's not a permanent ban, but it's a ban that has to happen. And I say that for this reason. If you go back and look at the history of radical Islam, starting in 622, we had the conquest. Islamic spread across Europe and around the world based on military conquest. It's been happening ever since. The Quran is literally the battle manual for this radical religion, and people are trying to say this is a one-off thing. And I want you to explain to people this is not a one. This is who they are. Now, I'm not saying all Muslims are militant, but I would argue that the ones that aren't out practicing this radical form of religion are the people that are denying the Quran and not following the letter of the law.
No, you're absolutely right. And when you do an analysis and a study of the history of Islam, you understand the different phases. You know, it was first brought into knowing back in 610 AD, and the first convert was Muhammad's first wife, Khadijah. And it was. I mean, you look at the verses of the Quran from that period in Mecca, 610 to 622 AD, very peaceful. But then when Muhammad was rejected there in Mecca, and he did the Al-Hijra, which is the migration from Mecca to Medina, that started a different phase. And you said 622 AD, and that's when it became a very violent phase. And that phase ended, it was over 30-some-odd raids and combat operations, and the verses within the Quran reflect that. And then at 628 AD, that was when Muhammad broke the Treaty of Hudaybiyah with the Banu Quraysh tribe there in Mecca, and returned and overtook Mecca. And, you know, you read the hadith of Muhammad, and he ordered for the beheading of some 3,000 members of the Banu Quraysh tribe there in Mecca. And at 628 AD. And then it became more of an expansionist belief system that was rooted in, violence and terror by means of which they did that. And, of course, we know about Constantinople and the fall. But what the left has done, you just can't base everything on your hatred of Donald Trump and disregard the rule of law and disregard the safety and security of the United States of America. What this temporary travel assessment, that's really what it is, 3.0. Exactly. It only affects 8% of the world's Islamic population. So anyone that wants to tell me that we should not look at countries that are on the terrorist watch list, such as Yemen, such as Syria, such as Sudan, such as Somalia. We know that we just recently had a U.S. service member that was killed by al-Shabaab in Somalia. So tell me that we don't want to have better vetting processes for people that are coming from these countries, and also understand that the Somali Muslim community in Minnesota has been rife with Islamic jihadism. I think 5 or 6 different federal cases that have sent people to prison because of what is happening up there. So, yes, we need to be able to protect this country. The president, under Article 2 of the Constitution, has those enumerated powers, and this is not about the left and their ideological agenda and their will. This is not about, MS-13 having a spark of divinity. We have enemies that are out there, and no one is controlling the passport systems of Yemen or Syria or Somalia or Sudan.
Yeah, if they can't know who their people are, how the hell are we supposed to know? And
it's a no-brainer.
Right, and that's the thing. That's my biggest beef, and that's why I think I get more vocal and upset, and probably louder than I should, is the lack of logic and the irrational response. I mean, when you look at the things that Maxine Waters has said and done, and I have Omar Navarro coming on after this to talk about it, because I think that's a man who is ripe to step into her seat. But this is a woman who's unopposed 13 or 14 terms, and who is rated probably the most corrupt politician of the 535 that exist. She is a mouthpiece for the left now. I would argue that starting with President Obama and the opportunity that President Obama afforded this country to mend the fence between race relations, between blacks and whites, was an 8-year error that will never, ever live down. And he had a chance to do it. I think he did the opposite. I think he divided us more along racial lines than any president in my lifetime. I feel like she does the same. Keith Ellison. I mean, this guy went on Jake Tapper and flat out lied about his relationship with the biggest bigot I've ever known in Louis Farrakhan, short of a member of the KKK. Louis Farrakhan's one of the most radical, anti-American hating. He's a Jeremiah Wright in different clothing. And these people who are, and I'm using the air quotes, leaders in the black community with Al Sharpton and others, I get frustrated because, Colonel, I talk to people like you, I meet people like you, and I study people like you, and I study people like Ben Carson, true leaders who should be true leaders in the black community, and I continue to wonder why the black community turns away from men like you. And from women like Condoleezza Rice and others who have made it. Well, hell, Dr. Ben Carson is one of the greatest examples in the world of you can be whatever you want to be in this country if you work your ass off. And this man is shunned in the community. And I look at people like you and I think, okay, first off, you may not want this, but after President Trump is done, I want you as my next president. I believe that you possess all the things that a president should possess, which is first and foremost starts with the love of the country, but you've served. And in watching a lot of your speeches as you tour the country and speak to these young men and women, and I couldn't help but be just stunned at when you were confronted by the history professor who didn't know his history and who was embarrassed by you and got mad about the fact that you were just labeling facts. I wonder what the hell we're doing.
Well, I think the most important thing for us to realize is that the left is slowly but surely losing its hold within the black community. I mean, these charlatans that we put out there are starting to lose their effect and their stranglehold because the continual preaching of a victimization mentality and victimhood, that's not going anywhere anymore. But, you know, it's open season on anyone that is a politically opposing voice to the left, and especially if you're a minority politically opposition voice to the left and what they stand for and what they believe in. So there is an incredible demonization of people like myself or Dr. Ben Carson or Herman Cain. You know, what I find so appalling is, you know, the whole thing about Roseanne and the tweet that she sent out about Valerie Jarrett. But if you remember, there was a Washington Post cartoonist who drew a cartoon caricature of Condoleezza Rice as a black, you know, slave mama that said, "I don't know nothing about, birthing tubes." You know, it was talking about those, and no one said anything. It was like, hey, that's all fine and well. So this hypocrisy and these duplicitous actions are starting to come to light because how can, you know, Condoleezza Rice is a very accomplished woman, born and raised down in Birmingham, Alabama. I mean, she knows the struggles of the civil rights era, and look at what she has accomplished in life. And for a place like a Rutgers University to say that we're not going to allow her to speak at a commencement ceremony because, you know, she hasn't achieved anything. You know, this is the type of disregard and disrespect of accomplished black conservatives that is really being called into question. And I had to tell you something, Curt, this is honestly, I'm not going to go visit the African American Museum or History Museum in Washington, D.C., because it does not feature these prominent black conservatives such as Condoleezza Rice or Clarence Thomas.
Right. And I listen, I'm not a Kanye West fan. I've never been a Kanye West fan from his perspective or any other perspective. But I think he is a case study in what the modern-day left is about. I mean, this guy comes out and basically just says, and let's be clear, the guy has made himself a phenomenal career. Much like LeBron James, you know, everybody wants to talk about LeBron James and all the crap around him. Fact of the matter is he hasn't committed a crime. He's grown up right. He's helped young black men and women, young black children get educations. He's done a lot of great things. All my differences with him are as an athlete. But when you look at somebody like Condoleezza Rice and you and Ben Carson and Herman Cain, and you see the odd, you had to grow up and fight things I never had to fight. I grew up very poor middle class. My father was in the Army. You know, I worked for the things I got in my life. But it was different for me. I didn't have to overcome hurdles. But here's the thing. And I got to tell you, I have Sonny Johnson has pushed me on 2 books I just got done reading. One was by Booker T. Washington, and the other was My Bond is My Freedom. I've read these books, and they're just incredible insights into the history of this country and the horrid things that this country did. But we got past that. We got rid of that. We marginalized the KKK. There are very few places ever where there's people marching around with white hoods on their head, number one. And number two, they are insignificant anymore. They don't matter. But the left is trying to make us focus on things, like you just said. All those things that you talked about, they offend me. But aren't we? We're bigger people in the sense we walk past that. If I was Sarah Huckabee Sanders, I would have done exactly what she did. I don't want to eat at a restaurant that doesn't want to serve me. I don't have a problem walking out. I'm sure it's embarrassing and all things that go with that. But our Constitution affords the right for jerks to live here, for racists to live here. And we have to put up with that marginalized group to have the incredible freedoms we have, because men like you and your fellow warfighters and your fallen warriors who have been buried in countries around the world to fight for the freedom of people you don't know, and to fight for Muslims you didn't know. The fact that you could be marginalized, to me, says quite a bit about, A, where the left is, number one, and B, where the media has gone. Listen, I'm not about touting my own horn, but I work for one of the few companies left that actually reports truth in the news. And I'm proud of that. It means that the vitriol and the anger that I see on a daily basis is ratcheted up, especially since I live in Massachusetts. But let me ask you, Alexandra Cortez last night, who defeated Joe Crowley in New York 14th, is radical left. I don't have a problem with her getting elected. I wish she wouldn't. But the fact of the matter is, that's where the liberals, that's where the Democratic Party lives today, on the fringe of the left that wants to live in a country like the Soviet Union or like Venezuela.
Yeah, and I think that the more that they go toward the left, the less that they are going to find themselves being successful. You know, there will be these pockets where they will be able to run and win congressional elections. But I'm telling you, when you look at the landscape for the Senate races coming up, and close races in districts that really understand, the policies, the failing policies of the left. Look at what is happening in California, where they're recalling the vote on the gas tax. Who would have thought that out in California? So as James Carville once said, it's the economy, stupid. And first and foremost, that's what people are going to look at. Then the next thing, they're going to look at this divisiveness that is out there. You know, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, God bless her, she took the high ground, and that's what we have to do. Because when people want to, make those type of, absurd assertions that, you work for someone that I am politically against, you can't be here. Right. What's the difference between the Democrat Party that you once looked upon blacks and said you can't eat here because of your skin color? So now they're saying you can't eat here because of your political beliefs. And you brought up a great book. I was just recently asked to do an updated foreword for the re-release of Booker T. Washington's autobiography, Up From Slavery. And you can go to our website, theoldschoolpatriot.com, and get a copy of it. I would encourage so many people to read the incredible story of a man that was born into slavery but ended up becoming one of the great educators and orators of this country. That's the example that we should be following. We should not be following the example of Maxine Waters. We should not be following the example of an ideology that celebrates,
I'm embarrassed.
Socialism.
That's exactly right. I'm embarrassed that Maxine Waters is, quote, and I'm using air quotes again, a representative of the black people. If somebody like Booker T. Washington can take the high road, who on this effing planet has the right to do otherwise? When you think about what this, and again, I've always known about slavery. I study military history, so I understood intimately the Civil War and all the things that went behind that. And the fact that blacks served in the North, and by the way, there were blacks that served in the South too as well. But the fact of the matter is, for somebody like Booker T. Washington to come out of slavery, self-educated, by the way, which once again proves you don't need college to be a smart individual and to achieve everything you want in life. But for that man to come out of what he can, and the stories are subhuman. I don't know that I can explain to people the levels and the depths. It made me understand things I never thought about growing up as a child. And I think about my childhood, and his childhood was in his grandmother's house, which was a dirt-floored shack, and he looked back on his childhood with fondness. And thinking about the fears he had as a 7 and 8 year old, knowing the time was going to come when he was going to be separated from his family. All the things that go in, it's just one of the most amazing fact-based events and accounts I've ever read in my life, and it really opened my eyes to the term high road. This man had every right to hate white people. He had every single right to be violent to white people. And he understood that one of the most basic principles, and Colonel, this is something that really jumped out at me. His understanding of freedom was directly tied to education.
Absolutely.
He understood if he could read, he had power. And the reason that slaves didn't have power, they were not educated. And you saw gigantic movements, in violent movements, towards the slaves to keep them from being able to read and write. It was a crime.
Led by the Democrat Party.
Yes, and that's the thing that I'm blown away by, is a party that still keeps minorities on an inner city plantation, so to speak, has never allowed minorities.
It's an economic plantation.
Yes. Right, and they've always allowed minorities, starting in the 30s, becoming the welfare state. They've allowed minorities to keep their head above water and tread, but never have allowed them to swim and get out. And it's education. You know, it really is education, stupid. Yep. I mean, that's what I think about when I read that, and I think about men like you and how you had to persevere. And I know you're the first person that's going to say, oh, I'm just doing my job and I'm just being the man my father raised me to be. But that's another conversation. The father that raised you to be, my father that raised me to be, is missing in today's country, both in black and white communities. It no longer exists. Planned Parenthood has exercised an extermination program started by Margaret Sanger, who, by the way, if anybody wants to know history, the Hitler and the Nazi regime took their extermination plans, and the final solution, part of it was Margaret Sanger's Planned Parenthood initiative. But why does this party still garner a lion's share of the black vote?
Well, I'm losing you a little bit, but one of the things, Curt, that's so important is, you know, you just mentioned Margaret Sanger. Why is it that we have an organization that was founded by a white supremacist, a racist, a person that spoke at Klan rallies? Why are they getting taxpayer funds? I mean, to the tune of $567 million a year. So it's all of these incredible hypocrisies that I think that if we were to, as you say, educate people and get them to understand, if we were to have that open conversation about Booker T. Washington and his life and the example that he led and his belief that education led to entrepreneurship and self-reliance, that should be the prevailing message in our inner cities. Yes. That should be the prevailing message all over the United States of America. And you're right. How can anyone sit back and complain about their state of life when here you had a man that was born as a kid into slavery and walked basically from West Virginia over to, Hampton, Virginia, to go to the Hampton Institute to just get a beginning education and then establish one of the great universities that we have still today, Tuskegee University. That's where the Tuskegee Airmen came from. That's where George Washington Carver did all of his biological experiments on the peanut, not biological, but chemical experiments on the peanut, because that is what Booker T. Washington believed in, a relevant education. So all of these lessons are there, and for whatever reason, we're not talking about it in the United States of America. We're allowing someone like a Maxine Waters, or like you say, a Keith Ellison from Minnesota, the same place where you have this incredible Somali Islamic jihadism operating.
Oh, man.
We're allowing these individuals to be the voices. Or we're allowing someone like a divisive, hateful person like a Louis Farrakhan to have a platform. I believe in free speech. I fought for free speech. But we cannot have speech that is inciting people to conduct violence. And this is the danger of what Maxine Waters was doing. It was just a year and a few days ago that Steve Scalise and those Republican members of Congress were shot at on that baseball practice field. If we continue to allow people like Maxine Waters to incite and call for violence against, members of an elected presidential administration, it doesn't end up well.
I firmly believe that her words are going to get somebody killed, and I pray to God it doesn't happen. But I can see a law-abiding citizen defending their family in public, legally own a firearm, and then having shoot somebody, assaulting them, and have Maxine lead a march on Washington to protest the Second Amendment. I can play that out in my head just as long as the day. One last thing before I go, and I'm not joking when I say this. I want to see President Trump serve 2 terms. I think he's going to. I want to see you enter the political arena in the next election cycle that allows for a new Republican president. And I wonder if you're seriously interested in doing something like that.
Well, I would tell you, Curt, I get a lot of pressure every day. And so after this midterm election cycle, My wife and daughters and I were seriously looking at, re-entering the public arena in political office, running for elected office. So, stand by in 2019 for a direction.
For whatever it's worth, anything and everything I could possibly do to help, I'm here for you, Colonel. Thank you.
Appreciate it so very much.
All right.
And as I said off camera, we got to go scuba diving one day.
Absolutely. Absolutely, sir. God bless you. Take care of yourself. Stay safe. We'll talk again soon.
Yes, sir.
Sonny's Corner with Sonny Johnson.
I want to actually take a couple of the references to Donald Trump from hip-hop. And then we're going to try to see if we can figure out why they like Donald Trump. Jay-Z said, I'm at the Trump International. Ask for me. Raekwon said, I'm the black Trump. They are comparing themselves to what he represents. His wealth, his achievement. Capitalism.
Sonny's Corner with Sonny Johnson. Saturday from 1 to 3 p.m. East on Sirius XM Patriot 125.
We want to hear from you. Tweet the show at Garrick38. Once again, here's Curt Schilling.
Hey guys, welcome back. You guys heard at the beginning of the podcast, I played a bunch of Maxine Waters comments, which makes you understand what a bad human being this woman is. And you heard Chuck Schumer on the floor of the Senate chastising her. You heard Larry Elder talk about this woman wrote a letter, the only sitting politician to have written a letter to Fidel Castro to protect a murderer, basically. But I also offered you an alternative, and I talked to you about this. I've had this gentleman on a couple times. I want you to listen to a piece of sound. This is the man, and this is a man who represents the things that we should be voting for in elected office. This is Omar Navarro. Listen to this soundbite.
I first got involved in this. I was 19 years of age. I wasn't very happy with seeing how the political process was turning out to be. I got involved in political campaigns. I helped out many elections, U.S. Senate races, mayoral elections, city council races, congressional races. I was also, at the same time, I was working for the district attorney's office, and I was going to school getting my degree in criminal justice. Eventually, I just wasn't passionate about being involved in working for government. So I said to myself, hey, I want to work for the private sector. So I started working for companies like Samsung, like Sony. I saw that there's more opportunity in the private sector. And then I created an online marketing business where I had the time to do whatever I wanted. I can get up and leave whenever I want, but I can work as hard as I can. And I had no limits to what I can achieve. And I started seeing all these campaigns going on. I started seeing the campaign with President Donald J. Trump. And I saw him announce. And when I saw him announce, I was like, wow, this guy who's an outsider is running for office. So I said to myself, hey, I'm going to run. I'm going to do something. I'm going to make a difference. I was so tired of seeing my district here in the 43rd Congressional District fall apart because of poor leadership. Maxine Waters has done nothing for the people of my district. She has let my district fall apart, and nothing has been created in 27 years. You have people in Westmont community that have the highest homicide rate in the country, and no one's addressing that issue. When I go talk to people in Westmont, the people of Westmont are not happy with Maxine Waters. When I talk to people in Inglewood, they're not happy with Maxine Waters. When I talk to people in Hawthorne, they're not happy with people in Maxine Waters, which my grandparents live in Hawthorne. My grandmother's 95 years of age. She's lived in Hawthorne for over 45 years. She knows that area very well. She's seen how it's declined over year after year. For me, that is concerning. I would like to bring back economic opportunity back to the 43rd Congressional District. When I see homeless families, when I see kids that graduate from college when they can't find jobs, that's a serious situation that's going on here. And we need to have a solution. But the only way to have a solution is to encourage business to stay here. And not only that, we also have to encourage business to come back here. Because that's a big problem. We just lost Toyota to Texas. And we have to bring those businesses back. We have to bring back economic opportunity back, not only to the 43rd Congressional District, but to the state of California.
That sound right there, Omar, is exactly what I want to hear from a politician, my district or not, somebody who understands that power is at the local level, the ability to affect your communities and your neighborhoods. And first thing I want to say is thank you for joining me. Second thing I'd like to add, what's the word on the street? I'm supporting Jeff Deal in his run against Elizabeth Warren here. I'm clearly going to support you in your run against Maxine Waters. I'm wondering how it looks to you as you guys go door to door knocking and talking to people.
Well, when I go door to door and I talk to different people, it's a very enlightening thing. I mean, you do learn a lot of different things from people and what they talk about and stuff like that. I had one person was telling me about Maxine Waters' past and her supporting a known communist for president, Charlie Mitchell. I had no idea that, there's some things that you don't know and that you find out and you're like, wow, I was like, I had no idea that she supported a communist. My family came here from Cuba, especially from escaping communism. I mean, that's not a great thing. I mean, her just wanting that type of government in our government, it scares me. It should scare everybody. Not only that, she said Viva Castro at one point also. So that's concerning too.
Listen to this, Omar. I want you to hear this from Larry Elder.
535 lawmakers on D.C., Tucker. She's the only one, to my knowledge, who's written a letter to Fidel Castro urging him not to send back a woman who murdered a New Jersey state trooper, escaped, fled to Cuba. Congress passed a resolution urging Castro to return her. She wrote a letter to Castro. The woman who escaped is a former Black Panther. She likened her to a freedom fighter, accused her of being a victim of the criminal justice system, and urged Castro not to return her to America. The woman, Joanne Chesimard, remains at the top of New Jersey's most wanted list, and Maxine Waters urged Castro not to send her back.
Omar, I mean, seriously, how does a woman like this not only avoid public persecution from the media, but get elected and run unopposed? How does that happen?
Well, luck. I mean, that's how it happens. It's not. You look at all these races, you look at all these districts and everything. You're bound to get some people that are going to get lucky, and they're just going to skirt by, and they're going to retain those seats. No one really is going to look into them until they open their mouth. And once they open their mouth and they get a lot of publicity, people start realizing the type of person they are. They start micromanaging them. So it's gonna be they're going to be put in under an umbrella of scrutiny too. So that Maxine Waters has definitely done that. She's definitely said some things that are hurtful and damaging to the President of the United States and damaging to the MAGA agenda and the supporters. So I think it's her for advocating for violence is uncalled for.
Right. Well, what she's done in the last few days, I would argue, is criminal. I think she's going to be the one of the driving forces behind law-abiding citizen getting killed in this country. And I pray to God that doesn't happen. But if it does, it'll be one of the things on her shoulders. And I guess she referred to you the other day in a tweet as a convicted criminal. Making you sound like Al Capone, and you're one of the reasons why I walked away from my potential run against Warren was not because of any skeletons in my closet, because I've lived my life out in front, but the fact of the matter is your family has now become fair game to the media if you're a conservative. Are you ready for that? Are you ready for that level? If this becomes true, and I believe it will be, I believe you're going to compete with her. I believe you can beat her. If that happens, if you become somebody on their radar, are you ready for that in your personal life?
Yeah, it's I was prepared ever since I announced. I mean, ever since I went in front of her house, and I took that shot at her. I knew what I was doing.
Not a literal shot, but a verbal shot.
A verbal, well, yeah, in theory. And so so if you look at it, that was for me even go there. For her, that's like, I'm sure I got under her skin. And she knows that exactly what happened, and she's finding a way to try to get back at me, but it's not working. All this rhetoric from her is just dead rhetoric. I mean, it's not going to help people out here. She says that she's helping people here. She's doing things for people, but she's not. So I mean, she's obviously away from here. She's in D.C. She doesn't have the interest of the district. She has the interest.
She doesn't live in the district.
Her own family.
Is that right? She doesn't live in her district.
She lives in Hancock Park in a mansion, and it's a pretty big home. I mean, when you look at it, and I heard that there's a jacuzzi on the second floor. I mean, this is just like unheard of. When the median income in this district is only $40,000.
And let's be clear, that's not a bad thing. I'm glad she's living in posh and all the things that go with that. But the fact of the matter is, to come out and act as if she's one of us, one of the people, one of the middle class, there's nothing about her. This is a woman who was caught working with the government to avoid regulations and issues with minority-owned banks, and it was found out that she actually her and her husband were involved in one. I mean, she is. Well, she's the epitome of the swamp. She's the reason why we have to have change in our government. And so I'm going to finish with this. I'm a voter in your district, and I want my change in my country. What can you promise me, and I'm going to hold you to this if you get elected, what can you promise the voters in your district that will be different the day you get elected?
Well, one thing that I will fight for is making sure that we're sustaining We're creating jobs in the district. That's really important.
And how are you going to do that?
Well, I would like to work with current businesses that are already here, and I want to find out the solutions and the problems that are happening currently, so that way I can represent them in Washington. Also, I would like to bring back some businesses that we've lost, like Toyota. That was a major business. We broke families up when Toyota left. I mean, and people lost their friends, and so that was heartbreaking. I mean, I had a friend of mine who worked at Toyota and had to go to Texas. And for me, that kind of sucked because, I really want to keep those relationships here, and people don't want to move away, especially from a community they don't want to move out of. So California is beautiful, but we want to make sure we're keeping the American dream, not the American dream is leaving here.
As I've said in the past, anything you need, you've got from us. I'm a huge fan. I wish you nothing but God's best as you go forward for you and your family. I hope that you end up winning. You need to win. The country needs people with your story and your background and your future and your vision. All the best to you.
Thank you so much. God bless you.
Closing out today, thanks again to Colonel Allen West and to Omar Navarro. James Dellingpole tomorrow, and if you haven't heard James, you have to listen in. He is a brilliant little sprite of a man from across the pond over in England, and he is one of the foremost leading voices against the horrific hoax of climate change. But winners and losers. I'm going to start with my winner today. Out of tragedy, heroes are born many times. And I look at this young man as someone who's going to, I think he's going to change lives. His name is Kyle Kashuv. He is one of the high school students from Parkland, and he is the opposite of David Hogue. He has gone out on his own against the mainstream media, who is giving him not even a moment of their time. He's chairing summits, and he's discussing with students the Second Amendment and educating a generation on the Second Amendment, which I think is so insanely valuable. And he's doing it against all odds, I guess is how you'd put it. He is a kid who recognizes, well, listen, if I had to say one thing about this journey, what this journey has taught me is that I know very, very little about anything, let alone the Second Amendment. And he basically breaks it down that life lessons are few and far between for people that young. Anyway, Kyle Kashuv is my winner. My loser today, we actually had a soundbite from him. Keith Ellison represents the swamp, the cesspool. This guy is everything wrong with this country. I would tell people in the black community, if there's anybody you need to be looking away from and avoiding from an advice perspective, it's this man. He has come out and lied about his relationship with Louis Farrakhan, openly, blatantly lied to Jake Tapper, who surprisingly was putting the screws to him and calling him out for things he had done and said in support of Louis Farrakhan. He followed Louis. He was a very big Farrakhan supporter, and apparently that's all a lie now. And people like Keith continue to, I don't know, maybe they forget. The Internet's forever. YouTube is forever. Those videos are forever. So he wins it going away today. There's a lot of candidates today, but Keith Ellison's going to win it. Tomorrow, James Dellingpole. God bless you guys. Thank you for tuning in. And this is Curt Schilling for the Curt Schilling Podcast. Have a great day. God bless. We'll catch up with you guys tomorrow.
Breitbart News Tonight with Joel Pollack and Rebecca Mansour.
A lot of people not knowing what action they could or should take to make the difference. What I do is try to turn people on to sites like Breitbart, people who are writing and publishing the truth so that people will get educated. But, you kind of can't blame productive members of society who are kind of confused, perplexed as to what do we do to take this government back.
Sirius XM Patriot Channel 125.